Instead, Ewald kinda came across as more neutral than anything, which resulted in him feeling more like a secondary character in his own book. Hello, welcome to another book review. I'm your host, Kristen, and today I'll be reviewing the fantasy book Prince Ewald the Brave by Dylan Melody. In case you're interested in buying this book afterward, content warnings are blood/violence, brief child abuse, and death. I will start with the overall plot, then writing, world building, and finding the characters. I was given a copy in exchange for an honest review. Also, this review will be spoiler-free until this time, so if you want to avoid spoilers, I recommend stopping before that timestamp. Now that those notes are out of the way, let's begin! In a distant land, the Kendleys are the wealthiest and most powerful family in the world. Ewald is the prince in line for the throne. His father, however, King Jonahad, is a tyrant bent on controlling both his crumbling empire as well as his own family. In order to save everything and everyone he loves, Ewald must defeat his father and take his place on the throne. However, Ewald isn't much of a fighter in terms of fierceness and prefers to take a more diplomatic approach. This will make overthrowing the king much harder. For the overall plot, it was okay, but felt a tad disorganized. I do understand that this book was a prequel to the Gifted Knight trilogy, but was also a standalone, so it should still be a complete story with little loose ends. For example of the disorganization, a good chunk of the book was dedicated to building up a war between the main empire and the two countries that had allied against it. However, halfway through the book, the war completely fizzled out after one chapter. There was only one big fight that barely lasted 2 chapters. It felt like kind of a waste of time. When nothing really came out of the war, the book spent quite a while emphasizing and building up. That said, the conflict between Ewald and his father was well done. I wish I got to read more of that instead of the war, since that was the main driving force of the book after the war was quickly over. Or better yet, the war could have been building up while Ewald's tension with his father grew, and then had the big fight at the end, while Ewald was also going through the attempt to claim the throne. That way, the audience would have gotten a similar conflict on 2 different scales. For the writing, it takes on a more fancy and stylistic approach, especially when it comes to the character's speech. As someone who hasn't seen a lot of media with that type of speech, sometimes I had to read a few pieces of dialogue over again to grasp the full meaning. However, I think that was more of a personal failing, rather than the speeches being too difficult to understand. In terms of world building, although it was a mixed bag, it was still pretty good overall. The kingdoms were interesting to read about, and I did enjoy the conflict between them while it lasted. I also liked how the empire was so big, it was beginning to fall apart, which reminded me of the fall of Rome. That said, I did want to have more context on the priesthood that was in charge of the nation before it was founded. There is a bit about the history of the empires, but not much, and it did leave me wanting more. The MC, Prince Ewald, was okay. His biggest strength throughout the book was using his wits to deal with situations instead of brute force. Also, the plan he came up with, in the end, was pretty good. The one issue I have with Prince Ewald was, despite the title of the book, I felt the audience didn't get the best example of him being brave. I wish we saw Ewald being more timid in the beginning when it came to facing his father, so his acts of bravery did stand out more. Instead, Ewald kinda came across as more neutral than anything, which resulted in him feeling more like a secondary character in his own book. I also wish the part where he had trained for the fight would have lasted longer instead of a few paragraphs at the end of a chapter. Regardless of those thoughts, Ewald was still a decent main character all around. I adored Princess Isabella as a character. A part of me kinda wished she would have been the main character, as she had so much more interesting things going on. Not that Ewald was a bad MC, but Isabella tended to steal the spotlight whenever she was on the page. For instance, throughout the book, Isabel encouraged Ewald to sneak out with her to a secret organization, helped Ewald train to duel his father, and Isabel also had a gay romance with one of her servants. Isabel did get a few point of view chapters, but again, I wish you would have gotten more. As for Prince Boniface, he was the least notable character out of the three siblings. He did have a distinct personality, which was good, but he was mostly a background character. On to King John Heck, which is an antagonist I love to hate. He is absolutely awful in this book, which makes the fact that his own family is plotting to overthrow him very gratifying. Even in the first scene, the reader gets to see how much of a horrid person he is, even when it comes to treating his own subjects. I do wish he had a bit more of a personality besides just being abusive, but he was still a good villain overall. Alright, now on to the spoilers. I'll give anyone 3 seconds to clear out if you want to keep this book spoiler free. 1, 2, 3. And here we go. Out of all the scenes in the book, my favorite was the lesbian wedding featuring Isabel. It was a super cute scene, and the two of them are just the loveliest pair. I was so glad that the wedding lasted for a while, so the reader got to enjoy the entire ceremony. Also, the fact that Ewald's father remained miserable for the entirety of his rule after everyone left him was fantastic. Even the text itself says that, yep, he deserves it. Finally, an abusive character is not forgiven by the person they hurt. Perfect. Overall, I give this book 3.5 stars. The characters were decent enough, and the world was okay, but the war falling flat and not enough context for the history of the Empire was a little lackluster. I hope Dylan Melody will keep improving his craft, and wish him the best of luck on his writing journey.